Hey everyone, before we dive into this powerful story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more compelling narratives like this one. My father's words fell like a gavel in the crowded hall. My daughter has been nothing but a letdown. The room went quiet, chatter fading as every eye turned. His voice, steady and low, didn't need volume to command attention. It carried the weight of a lifetime spent in control. He wasn't teaching or advising me. He was marking me with shame, right there in front of neighbors, family, and grizzled veterans who'd stood by his side in battle. Then, with a deliberate gesture, he placed his hand on the shoulder of a young Navy SEAL, his prized protege, and proclaimed him the son he'd always wanted. The silence in the room swallowed me whole. I'm Theodora Pute, and in that searing moment, as my father's public dismissal burned through me, I realized the rift between us wasn't just old, it was still raw and gaping. The old naval hall was heavy with the heat of the evening and the scent of fried chicken wafting from tables lined against the wall. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of weathered veterans in crisp khaki, while women fanned themselves with paper fans and children wove through the crowd, clutching lemonade. It was a small-town gathering where everyone knew their place, where tradition outweighed any surprise. My father, Frank Pute, took the stage with the measured confidence of a man who'd been saluted for decades. His shoulders, squared as if still in uniform, bore a blazer that seemed more like armor than fabric. The hum of voices stilled the moment he cleared his throat. His authority was effortless, his presence a second skin. Then, with the sharpness of a knife, he let the words fall. "She's only ever let me down." The sentence sliced through the hall like a gunshot. Talk stopped. A fork clattered against a plate and froze. Every head swiveled, and for a moment the ground seemed to shift beneath me. My face stayed steady, but my heart caved in. He didn't pause. Turning to the young man beside him, a broad-shouldered Navy SEAL in pristine dress blues, the kind whose stance demanded respect, my father rested his hand on his shoulder. "This is Cole Mercer," he said, voice swelling with pride, "the son I always wished for." The crowd murmured approval, their admiration shifting to Cole, away from me. But then, across the room, Cole's eyes met mine. His confident expression faltered, his jaw loosening as he whispered, "Black Widow." The words, low but piercing, carried to every ear nearby. The veterans stirred uneasily, a few younger men tensing as if the name held its own weight. My father's faint smirk wavered, confusion flickering in his gaze. The hall fell into a hush. Respect, suspicion, and curiosity clashed as every eye fixed on me. The silence roared louder than any cheer. In that frozen moment, the story I'd kept hidden began to emerge into the open. The house I grew up in was small, wooden, steeped in the scent of black coffee and polished leather, my father's signature. Discipline was woven into its walls. From age 8, he'd line me up in the kitchen like a soldier. Heels together, shoulders squared, eyes fixed ahead. "Don't blink," he'd order, staring until my eyes stung. My bedroom offered no escape. Every Saturday, he inspected it like a military barracks. Sheets taut as drums, shoes aligned at a perfect angle. A speck of dust on the sill meant scrubbing until the rag turned dark. When I brought home a track ribbon or a perfect chemistry score, he brushed it off with a curt, "Don't get cocky." The truth was harsher, simpler. My failure was sealed the day I was born. He wanted a son. Instead, he got me, and every day since was evidence of the letdown he saw in me. My mother, though, held the gentleness he withheld. She slipped notes into my lunch, lines from Dickinson, Frost, Hughes, whispers of a different kind of strength. "One day," she'd murmur when he wasn't listening, "you'll soar." At 17, I left my Naval Academy application on the kitchen table, ink still fresh. My father found it first. Without a word, he tore it into pieces, letting the fragments fall to the linoleum like ash. He tossed them in the trash and walked away, as if he'd just fixed a mistake. But my mother had made a copy. Without his knowledge, she sent it off. Months later, when hope had faded, a thick envelope arrived. In the quiet of my room, I held the acceptance letter close, as if it might disappear if I let it go. My dream didn't survive because of him. It endured because of her. Annapolis stripped away any illusions. Mornings smelled of chlorine and fresh-cut grass, nights of sweat and steel bunks. My hair was cropped short, my voice sharpened into clipped responses. Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Precision was survival. I wasn't there to fight on the front lines. My role was in intelligence and operations, crafting the framework for missions others executed. I learned to hear what others missed. The shift in a radio voice, the breath laced with fear, the silence that spoke louder than words. At Coronado, the Pacific salt stung our lips as men hauled logs on their shoulders. I ran alongside them when I could, not to blend in, but to prove I could match their pace. Respect came slowly, but it came because my plans held firm. When chaos erupted, my contingencies stood strong. The first true test came in Africa. A supply truck's tire burst on gravel, gunfire exploding from the dark. The mission teetered on collapse. Radios crackled, voices shouted. I rerouted paths, adjusted timings, recalculated exits. The plan held. Every man returned alive. Later, in the debrief's heat, someone scrawled a rough red spider on the map's corner. It started as a joke, then became a name, Black Widow. It stuck, not for destruction, but for the webs I wove, plans that caught what others missed. That night, I understood the name wasn't about poison. It was about survival, about crafting threads strong enough to bear the weight of lives. That was worth more than any medal. The first letters I sent home carried the grit of distant soil and the tang of sea salt from far-off bases. In one, I tucked a photo of myself in uniform, the bars on my collar still shiny, my face too young for the burdens I carried. Weeks later, it returned unopened, creased from travel but untouched by my father's hands. Back in town, when anyone asked about me, he'd pivot to talk of weather or harvest, as if my name were a bother. He let people think I was buried behind a desk, shuffling papers no one cared about. The truth was sharper, but he ensured they believed his version. My mother was the only thread that held. Her weekly calls, soft over static lines, never pried into missions or secrets I couldn't share. Instead, she asked, "Are you eating? Sleeping? Do you have a place to pray?" Her voice kept me anchored across oceans. Then cancer carved her away. At her funeral, the church was thick with lilies and hushed neighbors. My father stood by the window, eyes on the parking lot, folding and refolding the program until it frayed. He didn't look at me, didn't reach for my hand. His silence spoke louder than words. Even in grief, he wouldn't bridge the gap. In Bahrain, the air burned like a furnace. My office was a cramped space, radios stacked high, maps pinned to walls, sweat dripping from every surface. But it was where the threads converged, where I learned to hear patterns others couldn't. The team started whispering, "She feels the web tremble." The nickname carried weight before anyone said it to my face. I added a line to every mission checklist. Who calls home if it all goes wrong? It was a detail no one liked to face, but everyone needed. Soon, men knocked twice on the table before missions, a small ritual that grew into a bond. One night, a young operator, Cole, approached my desk, his face still bright with untested confidence. "Ma'am, did you see that coming?" he asked quietly. I glanced up from the radio log. "I saw what might," I said. He nodded, a deep acknowledgement, a truth he'd carry forward. What he didn't know, what my father would never care to know, was that the mission he survived that week nearly fell apart. My adjustments, my web, held it together. Cole lived because of it. After my mother's funeral, as neighbors murmured sympathies, an old veteran leaned close and said, "They call you Black Widow, don't they?" The words carried across the room. My father heard, stiffened, then turned away, choosing once again to ignore what stood before him. In that moment, I saw the divide in my life. Out there in sand and salt and smoke, my name was spoken with reverence. At home, I was still what he'd always labeled me, a disappointment. Years later, I returned to the Florida Panhandle. The old Naval Hall was adorned for a ceremony, flags raised high, tables draped in white, pies lined neatly beside pitchers of lemonade. I'd sent my father an invitation, though he never responded. Yet there he was, striding to the stage in his worn suit, as if the hall still answered to him. He gripped the microphone, introduced Cole Mercer, the young SEAL, his hand firm on the man's shoulder. "The son I never had," he declared, pride ringing in his voice. Then his gaze found me, and his words cut deeper than any blade. "All she's ever done is fail me." Cole's had whipped toward me, his face paling. His whisper carried further than intended, Black Widow. The room heard it. My father chuckled, trying to regain control. "She just shuffles papers," he said. "Nothing more." He waited for laughter. It didn't come. The silence thickened. I shifted. Doubt spread. For the first time, the room wasn't fully his. The air grew heavy, ceiling fans turning slowly as whispers rippled through the hall. Cole straightened, his voice firm and clear. "With respect, sir, she doesn't file papers. She saves lives." He recounted the night the convoy's tire blew. Gunfire bursting from the darkness, the team moments from disaster until my plan guided them to safety. Veterans nodded. Younger men stared, wide-eyed. The room began to see me anew. Near the back, a boy whispered to his father, "She's real." The word spread like wildfire. One veteran rose, pressing a hand to his chest. Then another and another. They stood, not clapping, not cheering, but solemn, their silence more powerful than any ovation. My father's eyes flickered, his jaw tightening. The command he'd always held in this hall slipped from his grasp. For the first time, he wavered. The hall fell into a silence so deep I could hear the hum of the ceiling fans slicing through the thick air. Rows of people stood shoulder to shoulder, chairs pushed back, their eyes fixed on me behind my father. The American flag stirred faintly in the breeze, its edges quivering as if waiting. I stepped forward, my shoes echoing against the floor, louder than words. My father stood tall, but his jaw was tight, his eyes darting to the crowd instead of meeting mine. For a man who'd commanded rooms his whole life, he suddenly seemed trapped. I stopped a few feet from him, where every gaze converged. My voice stayed low, steady, but it carried. Respect isn't handed down. It's earned. Sometimes quietly, sometimes in places like this. The words landed like granite. Not a breath broke the moment. The silence pressed into every corner. For once, I wasn't the daughter dismissed or the woman overshadowed by another's uniform. I was the one shaping the ground we stood on. My father shifted, his smirk gone, the crowd unmoved. No cheers, no applause, just the weight of people standing together, their silence of vow. In that stillness, something shifted forever. The veterans who'd saluted him for years now looked to me. Neighbors who'd once pitied me saw me differently. Even the children stood still, awestruck, as if they'd seen history shift. And at the center, my father seemed smaller than ever. Not a commander, not a man who silenced rooms, but a figure eclipsed by a truth he couldn't bend. The silence was no longer his tool. It was mine. The hall had chosen, and for the first time, I stood taller than the man who tried to break me. The house felt smaller than I remembered, its paint chipped, the porch sagging under years of heat and storms. Inside, the scent of coffee and aged wood lingered, as if time itself stood at attention. I sat across from my father at the same kitchen table where he'd once drilled me to keep my back straight, eyes forward, though it still bore the dark burn mark I'd left as a teenager, setting down a too-hot pot. He'd lectured me for an hour then. The stain never faded. Now, his hand rested there, trembling, tracing the mark as if searching for something lost. We sat in silence for a long time, not the sharp silence of discipline, but the heavy quiet of years squandered. Then his voice broke through, soft, fragile in a way I'd never heard. "I didn't understand," he said, eyes on the table. "I expected a son. That was wrong." The words carried a weight I'd waited a lifetime to hear. Not an apology, but as close as he could get. I took a steady breath. "I didn't need to be a son to carry your name," I said. "I carried my own." The truth lay between us, clear and sharp. No tears, no embrace, just the raw reality spoken after decades of silence. It was enough. He exhaled, long and uneven, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of those unspoken years had finally broken through. His chin dipped, and for the first time he looked small. Not a commander, not an unyielding wall, but a man, flawed, diminished, honest at last. His lips parted, and a single word came out, rough, unpolished, as if it had never been spoken before. Proud. That one word stripped him bare, leaving him not as the figure who'd ruled my childhood with drills and silence, but as a man who'd finally seen me. That, more than any salute or parade, was the recognition I never thought I'd hear. Part 7, Chapter 10. At my mother's grave, the cemetery stretched quiet beneath ancient oaks, their branches murmuring in the warm afternoon breeze. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, soft and golden, casting a gentle glow on the headstones, making the silence feel almost kind. I walked the narrow path to her stone, worn smooth by time and rain. My hand rested on the cool granite, fingers tracing its rough edges. My voice was low, meant only for her, were learning, slow but true. The breeze stirred, weaving through the trees, and for a moment, I swore I heard her voice carried in the wind, gentle, steady, repeating the words she'd left me. Don't run. Rise. I closed my eyes, letting the air move through me, not fighting it, not clinging, just accepting. When I stepped back, I felt no anger, no need for victory. Peace was quieter than I'd expected. I left the cemetery with the weight lifted. What mattered wasn't my father's faltering or his late-spoken pride. It wasn't the whispers that filled the hall. It was that the truth had stood firm before those who needed to see it. The community, Cole. Even my father, however reluctantly. That was enough. The story didn't end with his defeat. It ended with me standing unbroken in the place where my mother once promised I'd soar.